Hello, Christian.
Hi, Steven. Hi, everyone.
Hello, everyone who's out there listening right now. Coming to you live from Open LMS, our normal e-learn community office hours here. Today is Wednesday, March 16th. It's 4 o'clock where I live. I think it's like 6 o'clock on the East Coast of the United States right now. It looks like my shirt is falling apart because my green screen settings are terrible. We'll figure that out. Ooh, okay, that's better.
Yeah.
Chris,
Good.
anything happened fun in the community today? What do we want to talk about today?
Um, well, I'm trying to recover from the session we had yesterday with Dr. John, and I mean
Yeah.
it in a very good way. Um, I mean, I have a personal inclination for neuroscience and hard science topics. I guess maybe that's obvious for some people already. So it's really great to have like a um, what was his? He's a doctor in um,
It was biological
biology. Oh,
neurobiology. Yeah, something with neuro it's neurobiological. Oh dear.
yeah. Uh, your screen fell out. Did you intend to do
Oh
that?
boy. My office just fell away. Uh, Chris, I'm going to have to leave you hanging for just a second. My computer is telling me it needs to reset. I will be right back.
Okay. So this is just me. If you're listening, if everybody is live, I'm here. Where the purpose of the office hours is to collect people's questions, thoughts of the day, um, and I don't know. We'd always welcome people talking about really anything. Um, we do similar experiences inside our company with clients, and my my takeaway from that is that you don't really know where you're going when you start. So it's really fun to listen to clients, and we can end up figuring out solutions or ideas of things we're trying. And something that we've seen a couple of times in the community and in our events is that there is always uh, great ways to connect through unintended topics. And it's happened also inside our company, OpenLMS, with about 140 people. Um, we should say that we are part of OpenLMS, which is a provider of learning management systems based on the Moodle LMS, which is an open source system. But we don't really see these spaces, the podcast and our live streams, as ways to promote the company in a very commercial way. Suffice it to say that I find a lot of very um, educational conversations within the company. Um, in fact, I think I can share a couple of things that the team has shared over the past week. Over on Slack, we have a channel where people just talk about random stuff. One of the things actually was um, I don't know if anybody here has ever heard of Project Zero. Project Zero is it's a project by Google related to the cybersecurity efforts. So what Project Zero does is to try to set up a set of rules and some metrics on how some of the largest software companies in the world deal with bugs. That's basically what Project Zero is. And I think it's been running for about 2 years now. So in these 2 years, they've actually seen how the community, at least on the large enterprise, they've been able to reduce the time it takes for people to respond to issues, to bugs, especially security issues, affecting usually uh, it affects small parts of a system, but oftentimes it affects large parts of the system, or is affects a component that is used by a lot of systems. So people need to be aware. Um, we've talked about a couple of issues happening with that in the previous months. One that comes to mind is the log4j vulnerability, which affected a lot of systems using the Java programming language, which was used by a lot of systems, not maybe not ours or Moodle directly, because Moodle is a PHP system, but the log4j was one of these big things. Okay, I think Ladek is back, but just to wrap things up here, the Project Zero is like a good initiative, but as I was discussing with the people of the company, hey Steven, uh, okay, just to wrap things up here, uh, what I realized speaking from people from the community is, even though Project Zero is laudable and it has a really good uh, way to work and it involves many agents, the truth of it is that it's really a drop on the bucket, because the the issue around bugs in software is just massive, more than maybe we'd like to admit. Um, and it gets a bit complicated when we talk about private software, because some companies can be hesitant to disclose some potential issues, something that the open source doesn't really have, because all the code is open, so you cannot really hide a bug. And it actually ends up working for the better. Um, Steven, I see you, but you're kind of stuck on your screen, so probably you're not quite back yet.
I don't
Um,
know what's happening with my.
yeah.
Can you
Um,
hear me, Chris?
so I can hear you. I'm not sure if you're on the record. Probably are, but your screen is all kinds of messed up.
Hmm.
Hmm. Um, So let me just mention another issue related to our company and the community that we have, that is the telemetry project. So we know that, and in fact, speaking of open source, one of the benefits or one of the assurances that we can provide to our clients is the fact that, given that the system is open source, we don't really have access to it, to the data, because every system is works separately, at least on the managed version of our software. Um, and if a client has no interest to let anybody else see their data, then no one else will ever see it. Um, but we like to run some projects where we can gather some value of that data, uh, especially if we are able to pull data from several clients, so we can get bigger trends about what's happening, either on an administrative level, so like what kind of resources each site uses the most, or how does an administrator spends their time managing an LMS. But it could also be, of course, related to students and what students do when they are connected, how often they are connected. And I think it actually ties with a lot of conversations we've had, including with Elizabeth Dalton and the people at IntelliBoard. Um, and we do understand the value of that data. Actually, I was just left a conversation about it, and um, we were discussing how to make the case of letting our clients use their data, letting them uh, no, give access to us to their data in a completely secure way, anonymous way, which is always not easy to explain, to make the case that whatever use we can do to the data will be completely safe. I've also spoken to Andy Braden, which is our cybersecurity guy, an amazing guy from California, very knowledgeable, and he will be the first to warn us about all of the issues related to uh, the impossibility in many ways uh, to have like perfect privacy, perfect security. In fact, that's why standards can be important, because they let you know what we are following, but standards are not foolproof. Um, so as long as we can give enough assurance to people that responsible use for their data, we can go to the next step about um, allowing or asking our clients to allow them to use their data. And to do what? Well, we can do a lot of things. Many of the things which the IntelliBar people is probably very knowledgeable about risk, detection of risk. Um, I come from a different background, speaking about the idea of risk, a very quantitative risk related to finance and insurance, very hard statistical modeling. But I think the principle is the same, and it's uh, what are the things that you do not want to happen uh, because they have strong consequences, um, like quantitative. Um, I mean, in terms of things that you can put a price tag on it, you know. And in insurance, that's very easy to see. An accident, or if you have a car insurance and your car crashes, well, there is always a risk that happens as long as you have a car. And depending of the kind of accident, then the cost is either the whole car or a fraction of it, or if you uh, were a reckless driver and you affect others, then the cost of that could be really big. Of course, even though we try to put numbers to everything so we can do a proper assessment of risk, then uh, we have to admit that some of these estimations of how much a risk costs it goes beyond numbers, beyond math or finance, like the cost of a life. But applied to education, we can have, or we probably should have a better discussion about what a risk is. Uh, we tend to focus on sort of the what's the term, the the um, the starting point, which is the risk of dropping out, for example, in case a student doesn't really connect. And we can talk about dropout of a course, or we can talk about dropout of an online session. But there is a lot more risks, actually. So maybe that's a good question that I would like to ask to anyone who's listening. What is an educational risk that we should all be paying more attention to? Speaking of risks, How you doing?
I live in Mexico. Sometimes things don't work out with the interwebs here in Mexico. Still in the year 2022. But I think I figured it out now. So a big hard reset of everything in my apartment has now got me back online.
Complete. Great. So me and everyone else were discussing risks.
Yes. What risks were you discussing?
Uh, no, I was. I'm not sure how I ended up speaking about risk, but I guess a great question for you is what kind of risks in education are we not paying enough attention? Because like when we talk with people like from IntelliWorld, we talk about risk of dropping out or risk of failing.
Mm.
But I think there could be more, better detailed risks that happen.
Hmm. Well, I would think if you want to get sort of heady about it, I would think what's the risk that we are, in the K through 12 space, what are the risks that we are not preparing children for to be successful in the college space, and then what are the risks in the college space that we're not preparing learners for the workspace, right? And we've had several guests on our podcast talking about how do we bridge the gap between the wholly academic universe and the company universe, which which is very interesting. So I think that's a big risk, and I think it's one that many higher education institutions think about all the time. If you want to talk about business risk, a lot of businesses over the last 24 months have had to confront the risk of whether or not to continue to, what skills are their employees going to be needing in the future, and how do they deliver those, and how do they provide those skills, and how do they do it in the most efficient way, and how do they also provide, what am I looking for, like, it's how do they provide that environment that people want to keep working in. So there's a lot of different, I guess you can either look at those as risks or opportunities. So that's,
Yeah.
I always find that, and it's a two-sided coin. Things are either risky or they're opportunities. Glass half full, glass half empty. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, in finance, they teach you there is a very direct relationship between risk and return. So the more you want to accomplish or the greater the thing you're looking after, it makes sense to think that the risks will be that much greater. But actually, all of this conversation really brings me to your session yesterday to John Medina, because one of the best ways that risks is reduced is by learning, by understanding something. And like the first thing that I came out from him is how much we know that we don't put into practice about the brain, about the way, the evolutionary way in which we behave now. And I think we are really massively failing to take into account a lot of that knowledge that's been out there for a long time.
I agree, but and I wonder if that's just also the nature of the human animal, right? I mean, we all know that it's kind of even funny because John Medina himself, if you go back and you listen to his Google talk, his talk at Google in 2008, he starts his entire talk, talking about, we all know that exercise is important. We all know that eating healthy is important and these kinds of things. He says, but I'm not going to be doing that. And this is a person with not only a PhD, but a PhD in brain science, right? Like, this is a person who studies these particular things. And yet it's a conscious choice to be like, you know what, exercise isn't going to be my thing. So, the fact that we don't implement some of these tools, these skills, these techniques, these things that we actually know about how our brain works. That is, I guess it's both. It's just, I think it's a commentary on how we interact as humans, right? It's one of those things. We have the ability to not do those things. If we were a cat or a dog or a tiger or something like that, I don't know if we would have that ability to just sort of ignore the optimalization, right? The ability to optimize or the necessity to optimize because you die, right? Isn't that survivalist? Whereas we can optimize in other ways.
Yeah, and that also reminds me of one of the other things that Dr. John was talking about. That is how the brain is not necessarily designed to learn, but designed to survive. And
Yeah.
I guess more often than not, learning and surviving converge, but that's not
Mhm.
always the case. Uh,
Well, it agreed. Well, I mean, it actually, I think it always converges, doesn't it? And in every case, like the brain makes a decision saying that it will be more likely that I will survive, or this body will survive if I make these choices, right? And so
but
it's always answering that question.
yeah, but I think he meant it like maybe in a more practical way. Like sometimes sometimes our brain is just wants food, just wants sleep, where we have a plan to learn something and it's just not going to happen. Uh, so because you guys talked a lot about schedules and the chronotype. It's a really
Yeah.
fun thing. I was looking into a test to see if we can share it.
For everyone who doesn't know, a chronotype. That's something that I learned about yesterday, definitely with my talk with John Medina, who incidentally we didn't necessarily mention that he is going to be on the podcast in a couple of weeks. We just did a recording with him. But the chronotype is essentially whether or not you're a morning person or an evening person, right? And then there's shades of gray in between. But really, he was talking about those two extremes of people who function better in the morning and people who function better in the evening. And he says the evidence is there that it's actually like genetic. It's hardwired into us about whether or not we prefer mornings or evenings or those kinds of things. So that
Yeah,
is I didn't realize it was. I figured you could just kind of train yourself to be what it is, right, and to be what you are, but I guess not.
yeah. I love the way he said it. You can change that kind of behavior as easy as you can change the color of your eyes.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, and well, it makes me think it's because I was reading a while back about how teenagers have, well, maybe some of them have big trouble adapting to a very early studying schedule,
Mm-hmm.
uh, to no concern. I mean, I don't think any school changed their
Actually,
or
the school that our kids went to in Bangkok, they purposefully changed the start time of the middle school to be later.
oh really?
I think it was an hour and a half or 2 hours later, so that the middle schoolers could sleep in later. Yeah,
Oh,
they actually
that's full, full,
followed the
full
science.
oh my god, it does happen.
And I think there's other schools that have done it around the world. It's definitely only a small portion of schools around the world, but some of them do. Some of them do.
I guess another question is how to make science more accessible and easier to apply in more contexts.
Hmm.
How
Well,
can
is it difficult to apply? I mean, is there anything that John put on the table yesterday that's difficult to apply or isn't readily accessible by your eye?
well now you're making me doubt because there is this book that I remember, I forget the author, but it's about it's called The Bottom of the Pyramid, and
Oh
it
yeah. Oh
shows
geez.
how
Yeah, the BOP, which now that you've said the name of the book, oh, I can't remember the author name. Now I'm gonna have to look it up.
okay, well, you look it up. I remember this example where mostly in India, a lot of examples in India, Jaipur food comes to mind, where they actually design a prosthetics, arms and legs, uh, to a fraction of the cost what you think it should cost, I guess, in the developed world. Same goes with a lot of other stuff, cars, um, and I don't know if it was in that same book, but Uh, but it was also happening in India, where the biggest contributor to increasing the survival rate of newborns was simply just let the mother keep them longer in their chest, in, like, hold them
Mhm.
closer, because for some reason the hospital had the uh, practice to just remove them as fast as far as fast as possible. um, so it's more of an issue. When you mention it, there is a matter of resources, but then there's a matter of institutional um, rigidity and inertia. And I guess that
Hmm.
explains a lot of things. It's not that they're expensive, but changing things, it's expensive.
Hmm. Well, I don't know. It's Is it expensive? And by the way, the C.K. Prahalad is the person who wrote the book. The
Wow,
bottom.
I haven't heard
Yeah.
that
I
name.
mean, yeah, you haven't heard that name in years. It's actually that book is 25 years old now, which is very interesting. And just when I googled it, but I mean, what he just what he said is that there's a fortune at the bottom of the pyramid, right? That these and one of the examples, maybe not from that book that I remember specifically, was that detergent companies who produce soaps for cleaning like clothes and those kinds of things. One of the things that they discovered was that rather than packaging them in large bottles, the individual sachets and the individual packages, they started packaging them in these things to be able, and they actually make them affordable and accessible to the bottom of the pyramid. And they, basically cracked open a whole new universe, not only a whole new market, but literally a whole new universe of profitability for themselves. Um, so we'll go back to your question, like say it, try characterize it in a different way. Like why don't we take these decisions, or why are we making these discoveries, or I guess what's your question?
No, I guess what I was going at is maybe the change itself is not difficult or expensive, costly, but what is difficult, the real challenge. And I'm thinking about a couple of things that we're working on inside, and I think it applies.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not really that expensive to change something for the better, like a process or a product, change a product for someone that's better. What's difficult is uh, maybe convincing a lot of people who are there,
Mm-hmm.
who I mean, if you put yourself into their positions, it's people who slowly over time have made improvements into their teams, their processes, their areas of responsibility, uh, and they have probably had a fair share of good, good, well-intentioned ideas that they just haven't panned out, and it was probably a lot of additional effort on their end. Um, but maybe one of those techniques, bottom of the pyramid techniques, uh, can come in if it offers a value. Like
Well,
if whoever is in charge,
I think this
if
goes
whoever
back.
is in
I think
charge
this
of the
goes back to your. It goes
decision.
back to your risk. Your the conversation about risk, right? Because
Mhm.
ultimately, and this is kind of interesting. I was just reading about this either today or yesterday. Um, because what happens in most organizations, ecosystems, the human endeavors is that we tend to optimize, right? And so we tend to find how can we incrementally improve what it is that we already do. Whereas if you juxtapose that against taking bold strategic decisions, right, where you decisively choose to do either something different or radically change the way that you approach a problem, then you are intrinsically also making a decision about risk, right? Taking a risk, but you're expecting to reap a reward. And the example that I'm thinking, or that was positioned or put on the table that I'm thinking of, is the United Kingdom's Olympic team. And I'm going to get the dates wrong here, but 20 years ago or 25 years ago, the United Kingdom Olympic team, they brought home one gold medal and like 12 silver medals, but they ranked behind, Ethiopia and North Korea in terms of the number of medals that they got at the Olympics. And basically what they decided to do is, rather than try to optimize for all Olympic sports, right, and spread their limited funds across all Olympic sports and do just kind of mediocre or not so good, actually, in this case, like all sports, they said, look, what are the sports that have the highest medal count and that we have the best chance of winning? And they basically took a really tough decision to cut off all funding to all of the other sports and, invest them solely in those. And that's how they became, the world champion cycling squad, over time, and swimming, and these some of these other sports where they now excel. And, I think it was the last Olympics, they were the second or third medal winner, in golds and silvers and those kinds of things. And so that was a huge risk, right? Because you put all of your eggs or all of your funding into 3 or 4 options rather than spreading it across, 50 options. Just imagine if that cycling team, got Giardia or, had COVID or whatever, and they couldn't compete. Suddenly all those millions of dollars that you'd spent on that cycling team, poof, not worth it at all. So, but at the same time, because they invested so much time and energy and effort into those particular sports, they came back and they reaped a very, very high reward. So that's,
That's
why do we do that? So again, it's if we go back to the bottom of the pyramid piece where I was just talking about detergents, the problem or the market is sitting there right now. There's literally, still billions of people who live on $1 a day or $2 a day, right? They're still consumers, right? And so which companies are taking risks right now in order to serve those customers? One sector that is absolutely doing it is the fintech sector, right? I mean, there are just a jillion fintech startups trying to figure out how to bank the unbanked, or serve the unfinanced, or provide credit to those who normally are not credit worthy. There's a lot of effort going into that, and to some great some great success, as far as I know.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. That little thread, and I do like. I mean, I never really follow like Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies a lot, but I did read like there was a promise of reduced friction, and I think that's a very key word here: friction. When you reduce those frictions for people to access things more easily, more readily, then you open up whole swaths of opportunity of markets, and I wouldn't say Bitcoin lived up to that, but other things did, as you rightfully pointed out. In finance, I wondered if education has had this opening. I would say to a fair extent, this IT like apps and things have opened some ways.
Yeah, I mean, education is. I wonder. I would love to think of a great analogy. One's failing right now. Education isn't the thing that provides the efficiencies. It's the it's the cultivation. It's the ground that ultimately those efficiencies grow out of, right? I mean, we wouldn't have those technologies today had not people been educated or been given the space to experiment and push things forward. I don't know. My brain's kind of spinning on that one right now, because you talked about the Bitcoin and Ethereum specifically, creating efficiencies, whereas one of the biggest complaints about those two cryptocurrencies in themselves is the transaction rate, right? You can't have transactions don't go fast enough in order to accommodate the needs of what are now millions and millions of people. So they build platforms on top. They build accelerators that actually allow the transaction to happen really, really rapidly, and then they access the actual blockchain, at a much slower pace, and they reconcile, in that way. Which again, that's just innovation, right? That's an innovative solution to a problem.
Yeah, but it does. I think somebody has to build those, and somebody has to monetize those. So then the promise is not fulfilled, like the in the spirit, of free flow of exchanges. And there is a word that I love, the economic word, which is arbitrage,
Mm-hmm.
and it's basically like it whoever finds a better way to do something, it cannot profit too much for so long, because if if the market is dynamic, free enough, then he will face competition right away as soon as everyone figures out how that person or that entity is making this huge gain that wasn't seen before. He will get a bunch of people getting at it and competing. So arbitrage always lasts for so long. Of course, markets aren't perfect for natural and human reasons, so some arbitrage can remain for a long time. But uh, and it's another way to see arbitrage is like there's no free lunch. Uh,
Mm.
you can stumble into something that works great, and you can make a lot of it, but you cannot assume that this natural god-given benefit is going to be there with you for a long time.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Mm.
That's interesting. I always thought of no free lunch as there's always a cost, right? No matter what
Like,
no matter
yeah,
what the transaction or no matter what it is that you think you're receiving, there's definitely always a cost, even if that cost is solely your time, which could be your most valuable asset.
yeah,
Um,
but and well, that's the other thing. Like, for example, if time is very valuable, then there is incentives for anybody to come up with a way for people to spend less time doing something.
mm,
But then if you actually gain your time uh, because of that thing that somebody else did, then you have to reward that person somehow. So you are trading your the time that you gain for some amount of money or whatever reward the other person is getting. So I think it's all kind of different ways to see the same issue
mm.
of no free lunch. um, However, we do become more productive over time as a society.
Oh, man, that's for sure. But to what extent? Or I mean, to what? Again, I mean, now we're going to get philosophical again. Does productivity equal fulfillment and satisfaction? Right? I mean, making more stuff and having more stuff and fulfilling more orders and
Yeah.
cranking out more hours of work, um, does that ultimately a fulfilling and satisfying life make? I don't know. Well, I do know in my case, but some people,
And but it's no, it's funny to think about the implications in education. What is the purpose of education? Is it to learn more and more and more and understand more and more, or is that not going to lead?
but I would
Is
think that I mean, again, if you want to get super heady really, really quick, the purpose of all things are to understand purpose and cheat death, right? So those are really the only two things that you've got going for you, because every action, even if it's buying a pack of gum, because that pack of gum is going to make your breath smell better, and that making your breath smell better is either going to help you to get that business transaction or your date, or maybe the woman or man you're going to marry, and then that's going to increase your propensity for perpetuating your genetic code through time and all that kind of stuff, right? So you can tie any action to that. So like you're either trying to cheat death individually or as a species, or it's find purpose and meaning, right? And so finding purpose and meaning comes to, why are we here, man? And this is, the great religious debates, the great philosophical debates of why do we do whatever we do? That, I mean, education, we're trying to learn, we're trying to unpack those mysteries of science and the universe to uncover the answer to that question.
well, I don't know what to say there, man, because it seems like more educated societies are less religious, like in general, generally speaking.
Well, religion doesn't necessarily equate to uh, finding the purpose, right? Religion is really more of a structure of a way to live, right? It gives
Yeah,
purpose
but
to many, many people, but it's not necessarily it definitely doesn't necessarily as a matter of fact, I know of zero religions that provide answers.
but I don't want to get into that religion, except that I think that you have a very interesting background, like in your upbringing. Is that right?
Oh yeah,
I mean,
sure.
and so do I actually. My
Mhm.
father was a priest
Yeah.
for many years,
Yeah. We
and
both have priests for fathers. Yeah.
that's really crazy.
Yeah.
um, I don't know. Maybe leave it at that.
Yeah. Let's leave it there. Let's talk about that. I'm gonna tie it in a bow for today for our office hours. Um,
Uh,
I think we'll have to find a nice solid topic for next week. But tomorrow on the hot seat we have Fred Dixon from Big Blue
mm,
Button from Blindside Networks. We're going to talk about the open source project and how we make that better. We haven't published the podcast this week yet, so either we have to do that.
yes, we do.
And then obviously, we always got to mention it. We have the instructor session is now coming up. It's less than 2 months away. We've got some pretty cool speakers that were lined up for it. So
Yes, we do.
there you go.
We're working to have a couple of Spanish speakers, which I'm excited about.
That's going to be super cool. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I thought we were going to have 4 Spanish speakers, aren't we?
Yeah. I mean, I'm working on it.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks for being in office hours today, Chris. We'll talk to you a little later.
Thank
Ciao,
you,
ciao.
Steven. Thank you, everyone.